Hello guys, welcome to the video on the channel. I'm of course Alexandrus guys, and today I have quite an interesting video and something different than we usually do. As many of you requested, I will be also discovering this under the radar low cap gems on NASDAQ and basically undervalued stocks. And first one that I came across is Troops, here to humanize technology, as they say. So every now and then I come across a company that makes me stop and spend a little more time researching than I originally planned. And most AI companies today, guys, they are trying to build something from scratch. True actually caught my attention for the opposite reason, okay? Because when I first came across the company, I assumed it was going to be another small cap business trying to ride the AI wave, because that's what everyone seems to be doing lately. But after spending a few hours digging into the company, I realized that's not really the story here. Instead of starting over, True is trying to reinvent an existing business. Personally, I think that's much more interesting investment thesis, because transforming something that's already operating is very different from trying to build an entirely new company from zero. And now that obviously doesn't mean it will be successful. Plenty of transformations fail, but I do think it raises an interesting question. The question, guys, could this be one of those companies that market simply hasn't paid enough attention to yet? Well, that's exactly what I want to explore today. So usually it's not because everyone is talking about it or because it's the latest trend on social media. In fact, it's often the exact opposite. The companies that interest me the most are the ones that quietly go about building something while very few investors are paying attention, because that lets you jump in early. Sometimes they turn out to be nothing special. Well, other times they end up being far more interesting than I expected, and that's exactly what happened in this particular case with True. Before we get into it, guys, I want to make one thing clear. This isn't a video telling you buy the stock or predicting that it's going to outperform the market. Obviously, I'm not a financial advisor. You should always do your own research and you should always do your own due diligence, because I don't take any responsibility for your actions. And my goal is simply to look at the business, understand what management is trying to achieve, and ask a fairly simple question. Is this a company that deserves more attention than it's currently getting or not? And that's what we will be discovering today in this video, guys. I will be honest, I hadn't even heard of True until recently. At first glance, it looked like another small cap financial company, the kind of business you scroll past without thinking too much about it. But the more I read through the company's materials, the more I realized this wasn't simply another AI story, it was transformation story. And I think those are often much more interesting because they involve businesses that already exist rather than ideas that are still looking for business models. And True has been around for a long time, okay? And this is definitely something to also look out for. So what actually is True? If you've never heard of the company before, the obvious place to start is understanding what it actually does, and that's how I did myself. That's how I started digging and doing my research. So according to the company materials that I've read, True has been operating in financial services for a number of years with a business focused on lending and financial matching while building relationships across the broader financial sector. So in other words, guys, this isn't a newly created startup trying to convince investors with little more than ambitious projections. It's an established business that's now trying to evolve into something much bigger. And that distinction is important because it completely changes how I think about the opportunity. We've all seen companies suddenly start talking about artificial intelligence simply because it's become one of the biggest investment themes in the market, and I think most of us can agree when it comes to that, okay? And sometimes there is genuine substance behind those announcements, and sometimes it's little more than marketing. So naturally, guys, that was the first question I wanted answered while researching True. Is management simply following the latest trend, or is there a real strategy behind the transformation? Okay, so let's look beyond the buzzwords. Whenever I hear phrases like AI, fintech, digital transformation, I try not to get carried away by the headlines, I've been around in the market for a while, I know how it works. Those industries are exciting, but they've also become some of the most overused terms in the market, unfortunately. If every company starts describing itself the same way, eventually those labels stop telling you anything meaningful. Instead of asking whether True is becoming an AI company, I started asking what management is actually trying to build, and that's where the things get interesting. That completely changed the way I look at the business. Rather than abandoning its existing operations, the company appears to be using them as a foundation for its next stage of growth. According to the strategy outlined in the campaign materials, the goal isn't simply to introduce AI into one department, it's to gradually build technology around the financial ecosystem that's already in place, making the business more efficient while opening the door to entirely new services in the future. And whether management ultimately succeeds is something investors will have to judge over time, obviously, but I do think it's a far more interesting approach than simply attaching an AI label to an existing business. And I told you before that they've been undergoing the transformation, right? And that's something that maybe has got you hooked, okay? So why the transformation matters, you may ask me? Well, to understand why this could matter, it's worth thinking about how traditional lending businesses have operated for decades, because Troops also engages in lending business. It's a Hong Kong-based company. Every application needs to be reviewed, customer information has to be verified, risks need to be assessed, and borrowers have to be matched with suitable financial products. Historically, much of that work relied on people, which naturally meant higher operating costs and slower processes as the business expanded, well, simply because there is more need for more workers in this particular department. And management believes technology can gradually change that. According to the company's strategy, AI-driven systems could automate many of those repetitive processes, allowing the business to become more efficient over time while supporting future growth without operating costs increasing at the same pace. And personally, I think this is where the investment case either starts making sense or completely falls apart. But by the looks of it, Troo knows exactly how to utilize the AI to their absolute advantage. That's a compelling idea because successful software businesses are often valued differently from traditional service businesses. And of course, none of that should be treated as a guarantee. Technology still has to be implemented successfully, customers need to adopt it, and management has to prove the strategy works in practice. But if they can execute on that vision, it's easy to understand why some investors are beginning to pay attention, guys, okay? And when it comes to the chart itself, you can see that it's been pretty volatile, okay? That's something that we can't argue about. But it's at nice entry point right now, sitting at just 1.75 USD, guys. And currently all the markets are taking a hit. Whether we look at trading economics and see how like indexes are performing and stocks, which at the first glance it might look like everything is going great, but if you just take it into perspective, last half of a year for most of those stocks have been terrible because of what is happening in the world. Same goes to crypto, right? So we really have this great entry point here at 175 in my personal opinion. But let's get back to what really caught my attention when it comes to Troo. So I will be honest, this was the point where I expected to lose interest. So that's actually a pretty big turning point. But up until now, I was thinking, okay, that's just another company talking about AI, blah, blah, blah. They are just wanting to jump on a trend and so on. And then I came across something I genuinely wasn't expecting. Because guys, according to the company's materials, Troo isn't trying to build everything from zero. It already has an existing financial ecosystem with more than 200,000 registered users, relationships with over 100 financial institutions, and thousands of consultants. And that completely changed the way I looked at the company. Suddenly, this wasn't just another AI pitch, it became a story about modernizing something that already exists. Because as I said, these guys have been around for a while, and you can even check it out on the charts. Back in like 2010, guys, okay? And that's just crazy that we can obtain such a well-developed businesses that are modernizing right now and trying to become even bigger and more successful for such a cheap prices. And the cool thing about it is as well, if you go to Yahoo Finance, there has been many articles about them in fact, and they have been also mentioned here in penny stocks to watch in May 2026, which also caught my attention, I'm not even gonna lie. So guys, there is a significant difference between building technology for an audience that doesn't exist yet and improving an ecosystem that's already been operating, right? And that's probably the biggest takeaway from my research so far, because management isn't asking investors to believe in an idea that's still years away from becoming a business. Well, instead, they are describing the next stage of an existing business that's attempting to modernize itself and expand into new areas. So personally, I find that kind of transformation much more interesting because established companies, they already have experience, customers, and infrastructure. And the challenge isn't creating a business from nothing, it's successfully evolving one that's already there. So they are pretty ambitious, but by the looks of it, they are on a good way to do it properly and to gain attention of broader investors and markets. So what makes this story different from other stories, guys? Well, one thing I kept asking myself while researching Troo, genuinely, was whether this was just another company trying to jump on the AI trend, because that's where investor attention happens to be today, which is also crazy that people just blindly follow many trends. But we've seen plenty of businesses completely rebrand themselves overnight, add a few slides about artificial intelligence, and wow, suddenly expect the market to value them differently. So naturally, I didn't want to fall into that trap here. So I started digging a little deeper into what management is actually trying to build. And guys, the more I looked into it, the more I realized this story isn't really about AI. AI is simply the tool they are hoping will drive the next stage of the business. The real story is transformation. According to the company, they are trying to take an existing financial services ecosystem and gradually build technology around it, making processes more efficient while creating new products that can potentially generate additional revenue streams in the future. And that's much more interesting proposition than simply saying we are an AI company now. Yeah, come on. Another thing that caught my attention was the management isn't only trying and talking about using AI internally. They are also discussing the possibility of commercializing some of their technology through APIs and software services. If you are unfamiliar with APIs, think of them as tools that allow other businesses to plug directly into your technology without having to build everything themselves. I hope you understand. Instead of creating software that's only useful inside your own company, you are building infrastructure that other businesses can potentially pay to access. So if that strategy works, it opens the door to a completely different business model than traditional lending alone, and opens an additional income stream for them, obviously, okay? Of course, that's still part of management's long-term vision and not something investors should assume is guaranteed, but it's certainly one of more interesting aspects of the company's roadmap. So I really like this approach with APIs much more than companies trying to build another consumer app, because infrastructure businesses tend to create much stronger competitive advantages if they gain adoption. Then as far as AI, to me, this is actually the strongest part of the entire story, in fact. Not because AI is some magic solution, but because management seems to be using it to improve a business that's already operating instead of building a business around the AI itself and around the hype of AI. And I think it's an important difference, guys, okay? They also have the investor relations listed on their website, fully transparent with all the press releases, same with SEC filings. So if you want to verify all of those details, it is all absolutely available on Troops website, which will be linked down below in the description, guys. And let's now talk about the software, and let me pull you up the chart again to see that this day also opened at like 192. We are at 175, but so far, because of the politic tensions, I mean, the markets are so volatile, but think of it as an opportunity sometimes as well, you know, like the fact that you can pick up not only Troops, but many stocks on some crazy discounts is absolutely insane. So that's really, really cool. But obviously, guys, as I said at the beginning of the video, always make sure you do proper research, always make sure that you invest money that you can afford to lose. Even though it's stocks, it can still be volatile and it can still be risky. But again, let's talk about the software of Troops. So something else I wasn't expecting to find while reading through the materials was how much emphasis was placed on the company's existing assets. Most small cap companies pitching an ambitious future rely almost entirely on projections, and they tell investors what they hope to build one day, you know. Yeah, Troo's story is a little different, because according to the information provided, The company has already established operating businesses as well as several tangible property assets in Hong Kong, including a 19-story commercial building. That obviously doesn't determine whether the stock is undervalued, but it does add another layer to the story that many early-stage companies simply don't have. So personally, I always prefer seeing businesses with multiple pieces already in place. Existing operations, existing relationships, real assets, and a clear direction tend to make a transformation story much more believable than a company that's asking investors to imagine what it might become 5 years from now. It doesn't eliminate the risk, but it gives management a stronger foundation to build on. So why am I looking at it now? Well, one question I kept asking myself throughout this research was why this company is beginning to appear on investors' radar now instead of a few years ago. So from what I can see and understand, it's really a combination of several factors coming together at the same time. First, obviously, it is the artificial intelligence and the fact that it has shifted the way investors evaluate businesses. Companies that can demonstrate genuine operational improvements through AI are naturally receiving more and much more, in fact, attention than they were just a few years ago. And second, Troo isn't simply talking about future ideas anymore. Management has already outlined a roadmap that includes AI integration, API development, and expanding the company's technology platform. So investors now have something concrete they can follow instead of just broad ambitions. And finally, I think there is the valuation question. Markets don't instantly change, guys. They don't instantly change the way they look at businesses. And if you've been in stocks or crypto for a while, then you know that it is like that. Sometimes they continue valuing a company based on what it used to be, even while management is trying to build something completely different. I'm not saying that's definitely happening here, okay? Because I can't see the future. But I do think that's the question investors should be asking themselves. Is the market still looking at yesterday's business, or is it beginning to recognize what management is trying to build for tomorrow? I think that's probably the biggest reason why Troo has become interesting enough for me to spend time researching it. So why people are starting to notice it, you might ask me as well? Well, I think this is probably the question that matters most. Why are people beginning to pay attention now instead of 2 or 3 years ago? Well, from what I gathered, it comes down to the possibility that the market might still be looking at Troo as the company it used to be, rather than the company management is trying to create. So whether that perception eventually changes depends entirely on execution. Investors aren't going to reward a PowerPoint presentation, obviously. They will want to see new products, stronger financial performance, evidence that the AI strategy is producing measurable results, and proof that the business can continue growing in a scalable way. So that's why I don't really see this as a typical value story or a typical AI story. It's somewhere in the middle, in fact. The company already exists, it already generates business, but management is trying to move it into an entirely different category over the coming years. If they execute well, it's not difficult to imagine why the market might eventually value the business differently than it does today. But on the other hand, if execution falls short or the technology doesn't deliver what management expects, investors could remain skeptical for a long time. And that's the reality of transformation stories. They create opportunity, but they also create uncertainty. So looking at it objectively, whenever I make videos about small companies or small coins, I always try to separate the business itself from the stock. Those aren't always the same thing, you know? You can have an interesting company that's already priced for perfection, and you can also have business with plenty of challenges that's simply being overlooked by the market. So figuring out which category a company belongs to is where the real work begins. With Troo, I don't think the investment thesis should be, well, this stock is definitely going to outperform. I think the more reasonable conclusion is that management has presented a strategy that's ambitious, logical in many respects, and certainly worth following over the next few years. The question investors need to answer for themselves is whether they believe management can actually deliver on that vision. And let me tell you that Troops has a really experienced management and team. So that's ultimately what will determine how the market values the company going forward. So obviously, guys, there is risks, there is expectations, and there is my final thoughts that I also want to simply wrap up and talk about. So at this point, I think it's only fair to talk about the other side of the story because every investment has one. It's easy to get excited when company starts talking about artificial intelligence, digital transformation, and new revenue opportunities, but none of those things automatically translate into shareholder value. The market has seen plenty of businesses announce ambitious plans over the years that never quite materialized. That's why in situations like this, I always, and I mean always, try to separate the vision from the execution. Troops management has laid out a roadmap that I think is genuinely interesting. They are aiming to modernize an established financial services business by integrating AI into key parts of their ecosystem while also expanding their technology offering beyond their own operations. On paper, it's a strategy that makes sense. The real question though is whether they will be able to execute it over the coming years. And that's something no investor, analyst or YouTuber like me can answer today because we can't see the future, as I said. Some people can claim that they can, but no, we can't. Another factor worth keeping in mind is that it's still a relatively small company, guys, okay? It is still a relatively small company with small cap and, well, the volume is also relatively small, so that's why the volatility here is quite big because small price small buys and sells can cause quite a big price movements, okay? So small cap stocks tend to experience higher volatility than larger businesses due to this. And sentiment can change very quickly, and you can even see it by the chart if you zoom it out to like 6 months or 1 year. You can see that it's been jumping up and down, okay? That's normal when it comes to small cap projects. Positive news can move the share price significantly, but the opposite is also true. If growth slows, project takes longer than expected, or broader market conditions deteriorate, such as Iran's situation, for example, investors should be prepared for that volatility. That's simply part of investing in companies at this stage of their development. And I also think it's important to remember that transformation stories require patience, guys. Even if management executes everything exactly as planned, markets rarely change their opinion overnight, okay? Investors usually want to see the consistent financial results, stronger fundamentals, and evidence that new strategy is translating into measurable progress before assigning a higher valuation. So in other words, the opportunity, if there is one, comes from the company proving itself over time rather than from simply announcing ambitious goals. That's one of the reasons I found this story interesting in the first place. It's not built around a single product launch or on one headline that's expected to change everything overnight. Instead, guys, it's about a business that's attempting to evolve. According to the company's materials, that evolution includes expanding its AI capabilities, building technology that can support both its own operations and external partners, while continuing to leverage the financial ecosystem and assets it has already developed over the years. Whether that strategy ultimately succeeds is something only time will tell, but I do think it's a more compelling narrative than many of the speculative AI stories we've seen over the last couple of years. So personally, guys, I really enjoy researching companies exactly like this. Not because I expect every one of them to become the next big player, okay? I mean, I'm not expecting them to become next market leader instantly. It's quite different, okay? It's quite different, guys. Well, because they force you to think beyond the current share price. That's why I like researching them, and that's why I like to check them out. Because they force you to think beyond the current share price. They force you to open your head and think and ask yourself different questions. You start asking different questions. Is management allocating capital wisely? Does the strategy actually solve a real problem? Are they building something that can become more valuable over time? And most importantly, is the market paying enough attention, or is it still looking at the company through the lens of what it used to be rather than what it could potentially become? And I don't think anyone should invest in companies simply because they watched a YouTube video, and that certainly isn't the purpose of this one. My goal was to introduce a business that I found genuinely interesting and explain why it started appearing on the radar of some investors. If nothing else, hopefully this gives you another company to research and another perspective to consider the next time you're looking for businesses outside the names everyone talks about every day. Because me personally, I will be pulling a trigger on this one and getting some Troops to my portfolio. But as always, I'd encourage you to read the whole company's public filings. You have everything available on their website as well. Take a look at the financial statements, do your own research before making any investment decisions. Small cap investings come with additional risk, and everyone has a different investment strategy and risk tolerance. If you would like to learn more about them, I will leave the resources down below. I will leave the link down below as well. And if you want to continue your research, then you can go ahead and use those links. I'd also be interested to hear what you guys think. after looking into the company yourself or after watching this video? Do you see this as an established business that's successfully reinventing itself, or do you think the market is valuing it appropriately today? Let me know. I'm genuinely interested. I'm waiting for your thoughts in the comments, and well, if you also would like me to review some other small cap companies that you might have in mind, or maybe you know and think they're undervalued as well, you can let me know in the comments. I will do my research and try to bring you guys more. But Troops, definitely something to at least consider researching. That's what I think. Again, my personal opinion only, not a financial advice. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope that you enjoyed. Remember to smash the like button, subscribe, and again I will say that I would love to hear your opinions in the comment section down below. And now I'm out, and I'll see you in the next one.